People often say that time heals everything, but time, I've learned, is just silence wearing a friendly mask. It hides the pain but doesn't erase it. I'm 74 now, and though my bones have grown frail and my hair has turned white as Tennessee snow, there's a weight on my chest I've carried since I was 16. I never planned to tell anyone, not my neighbors, not the young girl at the library who reminds me so much of myself, not even God, though I whispered it once in church when no one was listening. But some stories grow restless inside you. They knock on your ribs until you open the door and let them out. My name is Connie Stewart, and what I'm about to share with you happened in a place I once called safe, inside a classroom, under the roof of Jonesboro High School. It was a quiet fall morning in Jonesboro, Tennessee, and the sun was warming the windows of the town library just enough to make the dust look golden. I'd gone in to return a copy of Jane Eyre, my favorite book since girlhood. That's when I heard a timid voice behind me. "Excuse me, ma'am, do you know where the historical fiction section is?" I turned and saw a young girl no older than 15 with long dark curls and a shyness in her eyes that immediately pulled me in. I showed her the right shelf and stayed to talk for a minute. Her name was Emily, and she said she wanted to be a teacher someday. That's when it hit me. That same sentence. I had said those very words once. My hands trembled a little as I held my purse tighter. The world around me faded Emily's voice, the gentle buzz of fluorescent lights, the scent of worn pages, and I was 16 again, standing in front of room 204, where Mr. Walter Granger taught American literature. Back in 1966, the world felt simpler on the outside, but heavier inside my chest. I lived with my mother, Martha Stewart, in a weathered 2-story home not far from Main Street. Dad had died when I was 7, serving in Korea, and Mama never remarried. She was a proud woman, strict, proud, and tired most days from cleaning houses for wealthy folks across town. I was her only child, her only chance at a better future. Books were my refuge. While other girls flirted by the lockers or practiced baton twirling, I spent my lunch hours in the library, lost in pages of Austen and Dickinson. I dreamed of writing stories that would change lives, stories where girls like me were seen and heard. When junior year started, I enrolled in Advanced American Literature. Everyone said Mr. Granger was the best teacher in the district, brilliant, charismatic, and sharply dressed, with a voice that could quiet a room. His glasses rested low on his nose, and he had a way of staring straight through you as if he already knew your secrets. At first, I was thrilled. He praised my essays, highlighted my metaphors in red ink, and once told the class that Connie Stewart has the soul of a poet. It felt like being chosen, seen, for once, not just another quiet girl with thrift store shoes. Then came the subtle moments, his hand on my shoulder that lingered too long, the way he brushed past me when the aisles between desks were wide enough for 2, the compliments that crept past academics and into something else, something colder, hungrier. I ignored it at first. We all did. In those days, there was no language for what I was feeling, no hotline to call, no teacher to trust, and certainly no one at home I could confide in. Mama barely tolerated anything that distracted me from making something of myself. Talking about feelings, that was weakness, so I buried it. Every doubt, every moment of discomfort, every flinch. I buried it under honor roll ribbons and gold star essays. But something inside me changed after that first semester. And even though I didn't understand it yet, The light I'd once carried so proudly was dimming. That day in the library with Emily, when she said she wanted to teach, I looked into her eyes and saw a reflection of the girl I used to be, the one who believed that classrooms were safe, that adults were protectors, that dreams couldn't be stolen, but mine were. And now, I believe it's finally time to tell the truth. I was born in 1950, right at the turn of spring, in a sleepy old house that sat just a few blocks from the heart of Jonesboro, Tennessee. Our town was the kind of place where everybody knew your name and your daddy's, and your granddaddy's too. That sort of legacy carried weight. But in our case, it carried silence. My father, Earl Stewart, went off to fight in Korea when I was just a toddler. He never came back. Mama never talked much about him. She kept his uniform neatly folded in the cedar chest at the foot of her bed, and his photo on top of the fireplace, where the edges curled under with age. When I was old enough to ask where he'd gone, she simply said, "He gave his life, baby. Don't let his name go to waste." So I tried my best not to. I became the quiet, obedient daughter who did her chores, studied late by lamplight, and always said, "Yes, ma'am," even when my heart wanted to scream why Mama worked herself to the bone cleaning houses. She left at dawn, came back when the sun dipped behind the hills, and still found a way to press my blouses and boil beans for supper. There were nights I heard her crying through the walls, soft and low like a hymn with no words, but she never cried in front of me. Martha Stewart was made of iron, or at least that's what she wanted the world to believe. We didn't have much, but we had books. There was an old bookshelf in the corner of the living room that my father had built before he shipped off. It leaned a little to the left, and one of the legs had been replaced with a paint can, but it held magic, real magic. From Louisa May Alcott to Walt Whitman, from Anne of Green Gables to The Scarlet Letter. Those pages gave me a voice I didn't know I had. When the world outside felt too loud, I'd hide between the words. By the time I was 10, I'd read nearly every book in our tiny town library. I knew how to lose myself in language, how to build a world with sentences and shape feelings with metaphors. I didn't know it then, but that would one day become both my armor and my prison. School was where I thrived, at least academically. I wasn't the popular girl, nor the pretty one. My clothes were plain, and my hair was always tied back with a rubber band Mama saved from grocery deliveries. But when it came to reading out loud or reciting poetry, I lit up. I remember Mrs. O'Malley, my fourth grade teacher, once kneeling beside me after class and saying, "Connie, there's something special about you. Don't you let anyone dim that light." I carried her words like a secret badge of honor. I believed that maybe I could be someone more than just a cleaner's daughter, from a house that needed patching and paint. In middle school, I met Ruby Lane. She was everything I wasn't: bold, loud, and unafraid to wear color in a world that expected girls to be beige. Ruby was my first real friend. She pulled me into conversations I never thought I could have, made me laugh until my sides ached, and once defended me from a boy who teased me for wearing hand-me-down shoes. She told me I should write stories one day. We'd sit under the big oak tree behind the school during lunch, our knees brushing against each other as we passed around pages from our homemade journals. She drew silly comics. I wrote sad poems I never shared out loud. By the time we entered high school in 1965, Ruby had convinced me to join the school newspaper and the poetry club. "Don't hide your talent. Connie," she'd say, "if I had a voice like yours, I'd shout it from the rooftops." So I tried. I really did. Jonesboro High was a brick building with creaky floorboards and that sour glue smell all schools had back then. Our lockers clanged shut like iron gates, and the bell between classes rang so sharp it could make your teeth rattle. But even so, I felt lucky just to be there. Mama said girls like us didn't always get the chance. She'd had to drop out in 9th grade to take care of her siblings. She was determined I wouldn't follow in her footsteps. "You've got your daddy's mind," she said one evening, brushing my hair beside the fire. He was a thinker, that one, always scribbling in the margins of his Bible. I smiled at the thought. Maybe writing was in my blood. Maybe I could be more than what the world expected. That fall, I signed up for Mr. Walter Granger's Advanced American Literature class. I'd heard the seniors speak about him in reverent tones, how he made the dead poets come alive, how he challenged students to read between the wounds, and how he'd taught in Nashville before choosing to settle down in a quieter town. I was excited, nervous, but mostly excited, because for the first time in my life, I believed that someone might finally see what was inside me. Not just my quiet nature or good grades, but the girl who dreamed in paragraphs and found solace in syllables. But I had no idea that the very class I had dreamed of would become the darkest place I'd ever know. I still remember the first day I walked into room 204. It was early September, and the air was warm but heavy, like it didn't want to let go of summer just yet. The windows were cracked open to let in the breeze, and the scent of freshly waxed floors mingled with chalk dust. Mr. Walter Granger stood at the front of the room with a piece of chalk in his hand and a leather-bound copy of Leaves of Grass on his desk. He wore a gray tweed jacket with suede patches on the elbows and a gold wedding band that caught the light when he wrote on the board. His voice, though, was what struck me most. It was deep, calm, and precise, like someone narrating a documentary. It made you want to lean in, even if you didn't understand the words yet. There were 22 of us in that class, seated in neat rows. I sat near the middle, close enough to see his face, but far enough not to be noticed too much. Or so I thought. He began the first lesson with a quote from Emerson. "The only person you are destined to become is the person you decide to be." Then he looked around the room and said, "You all have stories waiting to be written. My job is to help you find your pen." The room was silent, but I felt my chest swell. Finally, I thought, a teacher who believed in more than just test scores. In the weeks that followed, Mr. Granger became something of a legend among the students. He pushed us to think deeper, write bolder, and speak with clarity. He called on people not just to answer questions, but to reflect. "Why does it matter?" he'd ask, pacing the room. "What does the text mean to you?" When I turned in my first essay, an interpretation of Emily Dickinson's Solitude poems, he returned it with a bold A+ and a comment in the margin. "You see the world with poet's eyes. Miss Stewart, don't let anyone steal that vision from you." I read that line over and over again. It felt like a gift, a secret message meant just for me. Soon after, he started using me as an example in class. "Read Connie's opening paragraph," he'd say, and then ask me to stand and share. I'd feel my cheeks flush as I held the paper in shaking hands, my voice barely louder than a whisper. Still, he'd nod approvingly afterward and tell the class. That's what introspection looks like. I felt proud, chosen, seen. Ruby teased me about it one day after school. "You know he's got a soft spot for you." She grinned. The rest of us could write Shakespeare, and he'd still talk about your metaphors. I rolled my eyes, but deep down, I felt a flutter of something I couldn't name. It wasn't a crush, not really, but it was a tension. The kind I'd never had before, the kind that made me believe maybe I was different from the rest. Then the subtle things began. It started with compliments that lingered just a beat too long. One afternoon, after class, I stayed behind to ask about a poetry prompt. As he explained it, he stood close, too close. His hand brushed mine as he handed me a paper, and I felt a jolt in my chest, not excitement, but discomfort. "You have delicate hands," he said softly, like someone who was meant to create, not clean. I didn't know what to say, so I smiled awkwardly and said, "Thank you," even though it didn't feel like something I should be thankful for. From that point on, he found small reasons to keep me after class feedback on my writing, book suggestions, even questions about my future plans. The conversations always started normal, but slowly they shifted. He asked if I had a boyfriend, if I ever felt lonely. Once, he said, "You're not like other girls your age. You understand things, feel things deeper." I wanted to believe it was just praise, that I was overthinking. But every time I walked into room 204, my stomach tightened a little more. One Thursday, he asked me to stay behind while the others shuffled out. I watched as Ruby gave me a questioning glance before disappearing down the hall. Mr. Granger closed the door behind her. He pulled out a book from the shelf, Sylvia Plath's The Bell Jar, and handed it to me. "You remind me of her," he said. "Smart, misunderstood, too bright for this world." He stepped in close and brushed a stray hair behind my ear. "Promise me you'll never let anyone silence you." "Connie." My throat went dry. I nodded, but I didn't meet his eyes. All I could think about was how his hand had felt too warm, too familiar against my skin. I walked home that day, with the book clutched to my chest and my heart thudding in my ears. Was I imagining it? Was I making too much of something harmless? Or had I just stepped onto a path I couldn't yet see the end of? After that afternoon with the bell jar and the whisper behind my ear, I began walking to school slower. I timed my arrival so that I'd slip into room 204 just as the bell rang and bolt out the moment class ended. But no matter how careful I was, Mr. Granger always found a way to reach me. At first, it was only after class. A comment here, a light touch there. Then, it bled into the classroom itself, in front of everyone. He started calling on me more often, not just for answers, but for performances. He'd ask me to stand and read aloud the most personal passages from literature, love letters from Fitzgerald, intimate poems from E. Cummings. And every time, his eyes would stay fixed on my face, watching every word leave my lips like I was saying them to him alone. The first time it happened, I told myself it was coincidence. The second time, I noticed how quiet the room became. The third time, I looked up mid-sentence and caught a boy in the back, Eli Carter, staring at me, not with curiosity, but concern. Still, I said nothing. One morning, Mr. Granger passed back graded essays. Mine was on Emily Bronte, and he'd drawn a red star at the top with a note you write like someone who knows longing. Underneath, in smaller handwriting, "Stay after class. I have something for you." My hands turned cold. I looked over at Ruby, who was too busy trying to decipher her own feedback to notice the panic growing in my chest. I glanced at the clock. Only 15 minutes left of class. 15 minutes until I'd be alone with him again. I thought about pretending to feel sick, about faking a phone call from Mama, but my legs stayed planted, frozen like the rest of me. When the bell rang, students poured into the hallway like river water. I stood up slowly, hoping maybe he'd forgotten. But as I turned toward the door, I heard his voice. "Miss Stewart, just a moment." I turned around. He was holding a manila envelope. "I printed this for you," he said. A collection of Sylvia Plath's letters, some of her unpublished thoughts. He smiled as he handed it over. "I thought you'd understand them better than most." I nodded, took it, and turned to leave. But then his voice dropped lower. "Have you ever written anything about us?" I stopped. "Excuse me. Your essays," he said quickly, smoothly. "You put so much emotion into them. I often wonder if it's all imagined or inspired." My skin prickled. "It's just writing," I said, barely audible. He leaned closer. "You can tell me the truth. Connie, writers need someone who understands their depths." That night, I tore the letter pages in half and threw them behind the old wood pile near our shed. But I didn't tell anyone. Not Mama, not Ruby, not even myself, not in words. At least, things only escalated from there. In October, we began our poetry presentations. Each student was required to recite a poem of their choice, then explain what it meant to them. When my turn came, I chose Edna Saint, Vincent Millet's I. Being born a woman and distressed, I liked the structure, the way it felt strong and complicated all at once. I hadn't picked it for any reason tied to him, but maybe, deep down, I wanted to reclaim something the moment I stood at the front of the classroom. I regretted it. Mr. Granger watched me with an expression I didn't recognize. Admiration, amusement, ownership. When I read the final lines, I could feel the air shift. There was a heaviness in the room, as if everyone sensed something but couldn't name it. I hurried back to my seat, my face burning. After class, I found a note in my desk. "Bravery looks good on you. Let's talk about your reading sometime. Just us." It wasn't signed, but I didn't need a name. I tried to ignore it. I threw the note away. I walked faster in the halls, started skipping poetry club meetings, and even began making excuses to stay in the library during lunch. Ruby noticed I was pulling away, but every time she asked, I just said, "I'm tired." But one day after class, something happened that left no room for interpretation. Mr. Granger was discussing a passage from The Great Gatsby. He had written a quote on the board. "So we beat on, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past." He turned around and pointed at me. "Miss Stewart," he said, "what does that mean to you?" I stood up, startled. My voice shook as I answered. "It means, no matter how much we try to move forward, we're always pulled back by what's behind us." He nodded, walked toward me slowly, then without warning rested his hand on my shoulder and squeezed gently. Some of us understand that better than others. The room was silent. Ruby's eyes widened. Someone giggled nervously. Eli Carter stared at his desk like he couldn't believe what he'd just seen. But no one said a word. No one stood up. No one stopped him, not even me. Because when the harm is quiet enough, subtle enough, buried in praise and poetry and long, thoughtful glances, you start to question whether it's even real. I began to dread Mondays more than anything else in the world. It wasn't just the thought of returning to room 204. It was the weight of pretending that everything was normal. Every smile I forced, every polite good morning to Mr. Granger. Every time I avoided eye contact with Ruby, knowing she could sense something was wrong, but didn't know how to name it. Neither did I. By November, I could barely sleep. My stomach twisted into knots every night, and I started waking up with headaches that didn't go away. Mama thought it was the change in weather. "It's just autumn creeping into your bones," she said one morning, laying her hand on my forehead. I didn't have the heart to tell her it wasn't the cold keeping me awake. It was Mr. Granger. He had become bolder. His comments weren't whispered anymore. They were slipped into the folds of classroom discussion, wrapped in metaphors so clever no one else seemed to catch them. Once, while talking about Wuthering Heights, he said aloud, "Some women are just too passionate for their time. The world punishes them for it, locks them away, smothers their fire." And then he looked at me, straight at me. I could feel the heat rush up my neck. The other students didn't notice, at least not in the way I did. Ruby turned to me with a puzzled expression, but I avoided her gaze. Every time I walked into that classroom, I prayed for invisibility, but he wouldn't let me vanish. Not when he wanted to prove something. Not when I was his favorite student, as he put it always with a smile that never reached his eyes. Then came the day that would carve itself into my memory like a knife. It was a Friday. Cold. Windy. The kind of gray sky that pressed down on you like a warning. We were doing group presentations on American poets, and Mr. Granger had paired me with Ruby and 2 boys from the basketball team. But when it came time to present, he asked if I would read the selected poem aloud to set the tone. I hesitated. He smiled. "Come on up, Miss Stewart. No one reads like you do." I didn't want to. My knees were trembling, but the class was watching, and Ruby gave me a small, encouraging nod. So I stood, walked slowly to the front, and took the paper in my hands. The poem was Robert Frost's Home Burial, a piece about a grieving woman, a cold man, and the chasm of unspoken pain between them. I had read it a dozen times before, but this time it felt different. The words stuck in my throat. As I began reading, I sensed him behind me, Mr. Granger. He moved from his desk, walked toward me, and stopped just a few feet away. My voice faltered, but I kept going. Then, suddenly, his hand was on my back, not gently, not briefly. It pressed into me lower than it should have been, right above my waist. I froze. The class shifted awkwardly. A few students giggled. Someone coughed. I looked out across the room and saw Eli Carter's eyes grow wide. Ruby sat motionless, her lips parted in shock, but Mr. Granger just stood there, pretending it was nothing. "Project your voice." "Connie," he said, as if coaching me, his hand still on my lower back. I wanted to run, to scream, to cry, but my body wouldn't move. I stood there like a statue, reciting the last lines of the poem with a voice that barely sounded like mine. When I finished, he clapped. So did the class, slowly, awkwardly, confused. I walked back to my desk, hands shaking, heart pounding so hard it echoed in my ears. Ruby leaned over. "What was that?" she whispered. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I don't remember much, just that I walked home instead of taking the bus. The sky had darkened, and dry leaves swirled around my ankles like whispers I couldn't silence. When I got home, Mama was in the kitchen, soaking beans. She looked up and frowned. "You're pale as a ghost. You eat anything today?" I opened my mouth, closed it again, then said the only thing I could, "I'm tired." That night, I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. My hands clenched the bedsheet so tightly I thought it might tear. I replayed that moment over and over, his hand, the heat of it, the silence of my classmates, the way no one had done anything, and I hated myself most of all for standing there and letting it happen. Monday came. I tried to fake being sick. I splashed water on my face and told Mama I felt dizzy, but she pressed her lips into a thin line and said, "You've got responsibilities. Connie, don't start making excuses." So I went. I kept my head down in class. Ruby didn't talk much either. I think she was trying to understand what had happened, but she wasn't ready to confront it. Neither was I. That day, during lunch, I skipped poetry club and went to the library. I sat in the corner and stared at a blank notebook page, unable to write a single word. Then Eli Carter walked in. He didn't say anything at first, just sat across from me and fiddled with the zipper on his backpack. "I saw what he did," he said finally. I looked up, startled. "I know it wasn't right." Eli continued, but I didn't know what to do. Tears sprang to my eyes before I could stop them. "You believe me?" I whispered. Eli nodded. "Yeah, I do." It was the first time someone had said that to me. The first time I didn't feel like I was crazy. He didn't try to comfort me. He didn't tell me it would all be okay. He just sat with me while I cried quietly in the far corner of the library, and that somehow was enough. After that day, something shifted. Mr. Granger didn't touch me again. He barely looked at me, and within a week, there were whispers going around that he'd requested a leave of absence. Some students joked that he was having a breakdown. Others said he was moving to another town, but I knew better. So did Eli, and maybe, just maybe, so did Ruby. None of us said a word to each other about it, because when abuse happens in plain sight and no one knows what to call it, the silence becomes part of the lesson. I didn't sleep the night after Mr. Granger touched me in front of the entire class, even though Eli had said he believed me. Even though Ruby's wide eyes told me she'd seen what I saw, a louder voice in my head kept asking the same question. If it really was wrong, why didn't anyone stop it? The shame settled into my chest like a stone. The next morning, I walked to school slower than usual. I wasn't sure if he would be there or if he would pretend nothing ever happened. A small part of me hoped he wouldn't show up. A bigger part hoped someone else would say something first. But when I arrived at room 204, the door was closed, and a note was taped to the window. "Class will resume with a substitute teacher. Mr. Granger is on medical leave." Just like that. No explanation, no meeting, no apology, just silence. That day at lunch, Ruby finally broke through. We sat under our usual tree behind the school, where we used to read each other's poems. She had been quiet for days, avoiding my eyes. But now, her voice was tight. "Connie," she said, "I've been thinking about what happened during the poetry reading." I froze. "I don't think that was okay." She continued, "The way he touched you, he had no business doing that in front of everyone, in front of anyone." I whispered. Ruby looked at me with something like guilt. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I shrugged. I wasn't even sure what was happening. I thought I was imagining it. He made me feel like I was special, and then like I was something to be used. Ruby stayed silent for a moment. Then she reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded piece of notebook paper. I wrote it down. She said, "In case you wanted to talk to someone, I think you should." I opened it. It was the name of the school counselor, Mrs. Pratt, and the time of her lunch hour. I stood outside Mrs. Pratt's office that afternoon for a long time. I could hear the ticking of the clock inside, the faint rustle of papers. My feet felt glued to the floor. I was 16 years old and about to say something that might change everything or nothing, when I finally knocked and stepped inside. Mrs. Pratt looked up from behind her desk and smiled. Connie Stewart. Right. Come on in, dear. She was in her early 50s, wore floral perfume and large glasses, and had a face that looked kind, though tired. I sat across from her and wrung my hands until they turned cold. I need to tell you something, I said, about Mr. Granger. Her smile faded just slightly. Okay. And so I told her. Not everything. Not yet. But I told her enough that he had touched me in ways that made me uncomfortable, said things no teacher should say to a student, and once put his hand on me in front of the whole class. She didn't interrupt. She just nodded and scribbled in a little notebook while I talked. When I finished, she sat back and gave me that careful look adults give when they're trying to figure out what part of the truth they're ready to accept. Connie, she said slowly, that's serious. But you're sure it wasn't a misunderstanding? Mr. Granger is a respected teacher. Sometimes praise can feel personal. The knot in my stomach tightened. I'm sure, I said, my voice flat. You weren't there. She paused again. Has he ever threatened you? No. Did he hurt you physically? No. But I'll make a note of this, she said. But please understand, accusations like this are delicate. If you ever feel unsafe, tell me immediately. For now, just focus on your studies. Okay. I walked out of that office more confused than I'd ever been. That night, I tried to tell Mama. She was folding laundry in the living room, humming along to the radio. I sat on the edge of the couch, my hands knotted in my lap. Mama, I said, can I tell you something? Of course, baby. What is it? It's about my teacher, Mr. Granger. I hesitated. He made me feel uncomfortable. He touched me in front of the whole class. The humming stopped. She turned to me, a sock still in her hand. What do you mean? Touched? You, not like a pat on the back. It wasn't right, Mama. And he's done it before. Said things, too. Her eyes narrowed. And what exactly did you do? What I asked, stunned. Were you acting too familiar with him? Smiling too much? You're a pretty girl. Connie. Men notice. Mama, it wasn't my fault. She sighed and looked away. Your father died fighting for this country, and all you can do is accuse a teacher, a man who's helping you learn. My throat burned. He wasn't helping me. She waved her hand like she was brushing crumbs off the table. Just focus on graduating. Don't go stirring up trouble you can't fix. That night, I went out to the back porch and sat on the old swing. The sky above Jonesboro was heavy with stars, but I couldn't feel their beauty. I had tried to speak. Twice and twice. The world had looked at me and said, be quiet. So I did. For a long, long time. After that night on the porch, after Mama shut the door on my pain, I told myself I'd never speak of it again. I buried everything. The notebooks where I once wrote poetry, the dreams of becoming a writer, the belief that my voice mattered, all of it, locked inside a shoebox and shoved under my bed. For weeks, I moved through school like a ghost. Room 204 stayed closed, and a rotating set of substitute teachers tried their best to make sense of the curriculum Mr. Granger had left behind. But no one filled the space the way he had, and maybe that was a blessing. Ruby didn't press me. She stayed near, though, sat next to me in the cafeteria even when I barely touched my food, walked with me to the edge of the lot after school, even when I didn't speak. She didn't ask questions anymore. I think she knew the answers would hurt, But then something happened I never expected. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was in the library filing cards for extra credit when Eli Carter walked in again. He wasn't carrying books this time, just a folded paper and that quiet look of purpose he always wore when he meant something serious. "I need to show you something," he said. We sat down near the back, behind the tall shelves where the light barely reached. He slid the folded page toward me. It was a copy of a letter, typed, unsigned. I read it once, then again, my eyes widening. It was about Mr. Granger, about how he had taken special interest in several girls, about how he made them stay after class, how he stood too close, touched too long, about how some of them had cried in the bathroom afterward, but never dared to tell a soul. "It was shoved in my locker," Eli said. "No name, just this." I looked at him, my throat dry. Who else knows? Probably just the person who wrote it. But I think this is someone trying to tell the truth, maybe the only way they feel safe. He leaned forward. "Connie, I believe you. I always did. But now, someone else does too, and they need to know they're not alone." I sat back, heart pounding. Someone else had felt what I felt, been where I'd been, and even if they couldn't speak out loud, they found a way to speak somehow. The box I had shoved under my bed, the one with my torn poems and folded fears, suddenly felt like it was rattling. A week later, the school held a quiet assembly. They said it was about professional conduct and student safety. They never named Mr. Granger, but they didn't have to. Every student knew what it was about. That same day, I noticed Mrs. Pratt, the school counselor, walking faster than usual down the hallway, her arms full of folders and her mouth pressed into a hard line. Something was happening, and it wasn't just whispers anymore. 2 girls from the senior class stopped showing up to 4th period. Then a junior quietly transferred out of the literature track altogether. The rumors grew, but no one dared to say the words out loud. Then, one morning, I arrived at school and saw his name gone from the teacher's list taped on the main office door. Just gone. Not replaced. Not even crossed out. Like he'd never existed. By Christmas, the story was out quietly, but clearly. Mr. Walter Granger had been formally reported. No charges were ever brought forward publicly. No articles were printed in the local paper. But behind closed doors, we knew. Ruby said she heard from her cousin at the Board of Education that at least 3 girls came forward, that one of them had a parent with a lawyer, that the district had agreed to a quiet resignation in exchange for silence. It wasn't justice, but it wasn't nothing. For the first time, I felt like the ground was shifting, just slightly, like the roots of the lie had been disturbed. I never saw Mr. Granger again, but the damage he left behind, that stayed. Even after he was gone, I couldn't walk past room 204 without feeling sick. I avoided literature classes my senior year, stuck to math and science and anything that didn't ask me to open my heart. But one day, in the spring, Ruby pressed a piece of paper into my hand, a flyer. Essay contest, Stories That Changed Me, sponsored by the Tennessee Young Writers Association. "You should enter," she said. I started to shake my head. "You don't have to write that story," she added quickly. "But maybe write something. You're still a writer. Connie, he didn't take that from you." That night, I sat at my desk, pulled out a blank sheet of paper, and for the first time in months, I wrote. It wasn't about Mr. Granger, not directly. It was about a girl who loved the stars, who thought silence kept her safe, who learned that the stars were still hers to claim even after the dark. The essay didn't win, but it made me breathe again. And that, more than anything, reminded me I was still here. After graduation, I packed my life into 2 worn suitcases and left Jonesboro behind. Mama cried at the bus station not because I was leaving, but because she thought I was making a mistake. "You've got no money, no husband lined up, and nothing but paper dreams in that bag," she muttered. I hugged her anyway, even though her arms stayed stiff. I rode that Greyhound to Knoxville, hoping the farther I got from room 204, the quieter the memories would become. But memories don't fade just because you change zip codes. I didn't go to college for writing. I didn't believe I had the strength to turn my voice into something that could be read again. Not after what happened. Not after the way my voice was twisted, questioned, dismissed. Instead, I trained to be a nurse's aide. I figured if I couldn't fix my own pain, at least I could ease someone else's. The work was hard. Long shifts, heavy lifting, difficult patience. But I found peace in it, a kind of rhythm. Helping others meant I didn't have to think about myself. And yet, there were nights when I came home and pulled out the old notebooks I'd saved. I couldn't throw them away. The pages were messy, some smudged with tears, others full of half-written stories that always ended too soon. One night, after a particularly grueling shift at the hospital, I sat by the window in my small apartment and began writing again, not for anyone else, just for me. The years passed quietly. I never married. I dated a man or two in my 30s, but every time someone reached for my hand in the dark, I flinched. I didn't know how to let someone close without remembering the man who had blurred every boundary. Instead, I poured my love into other things, into volunteering at the local library, into organizing community readings for kids who needed safe places, into gentle conversations with young nurses on their first night shifts. Sometimes, people asked me why I never had children. I always smiled and said, "Some of us are here to help raise the whole village." But deep down, I knew the truth. I didn't trust myself to protect something so fragile. I was still learning how to protect myself. By the time I turned 60, I'd moved back to Jonesboro. It surprised people. "Why go back there?" "Connie," they asked, "doesn't that place hold bad memories?" Yes, it did. But it also held the girl I used to be, and I was tired of running from her. I moved into a modest house near the old town square, not far from the library I'd once escaped to as a teenager. I planted roses in the front yard, took up knitting. I even started attending town meetings, something I once swore I'd never do. And slowly, the town began to feel different, or maybe I was different. One afternoon, while shelving books as a part-time volunteer, I met a girl named Emily, 15 years old, curious, smart, shy. She reminded me so much of myself that I nearly cried when she asked me to help her find a poetry book for a school project. We began to talk. She told me she wanted to be a teacher, that she loved writing, that sometimes her teachers made her feel like she was too much, too sensitive, too serious, too emotional. And that's when it all came back. The hand on my back, the silence, the frozen stare of classmates who looked but didn't see. But I saw her, I saw me, and that's when I knew it was time. Time to open my mouth, time to speak, time to finally let the past out into the daylight where it couldn't hurt me anymore. The town library held monthly gatherings for local readers, mostly retirees like me, some teachers, a few high school students looking for extra credit. It was a gentle space, filled with the soft rustle of worn pages, the scent of coffee, and the comfortable hush of people who came not to be loud, but to listen. I'd attended a dozen times without ever saying much. I was content to sit in the corner, smile politely, and let the others speak. But that afternoon, when I saw Emily come through the doors, clutching her notebook like it held her breath, something shifted. She smiled when she spotted me. "I brought a poem," she whispered. I smiled back, but my throat tightened. Not this time, I thought. Not again. So when the librarian asked if anyone else would like to share, I stood up before I could stop myself. The room turned quiet. I cleared my throat, heart pounding, and pulled a folded paper from my purse. Not a poem, not fiction, just truth. The truth I had written and rewritten in my mind for 58 years. "My name is Connie Stewart," I said softly. "Some of you know me from church or from the hospital, or maybe you just recognize my gray hair and bad knees." A few chuckles, polite and warm. "But what most of you don't know," I continued, "is that when I was 16 years old, I was abused by a teacher right here in Jonesboro High, in front of a room full of classmates." Silence. I held the paper a little tighter. His name was Mr. Walter Granger. He was respected, liked, trusted. He used that trust to humiliate, manipulate, and hurt me. And I said nothing for decades because I didn't think anyone would believe me. I scanned the room. Some eyes were wide. Others dropped to their laps. I've carried that silence for most of my life. It shaped the choices I made, the love I didn't accept, the career I abandoned. But I'm tired of silence. I'm tired of shame that doesn't belong to me. I looked at Emily. She was frozen, her eyes shimmering. I'm telling this now not for revenge, not for pity, but because I never want another girl in this town to think her pain is too small or her voice too quiet. I folded the paper slowly. I was hurt, but I survived. And now I'm free. A long pause. Then someone clapped. Then another and another. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was enough. After the reading, people came up to me one by one. Some hugged me. Others cried. A woman my age whispered, "He did it to my cousin." She just couldn't say it back then. A man with a cane shook my hand and said, "You're brave, Miss Stewart, mighty brave." And then Emily came. She threw her arms around me without a word. She didn't need any. The tears on her shoulder matched mine. In that moment, I wasn't just a woman who had survived. I was a woman who had spoken and been heard. It's been 10 years since the day I stood up in the library and told the truth. Since then, I've been invited to speak at schools, women's groups, even town halls. They call me brave, but I don't always feel that way. Sometimes I still wake up in the dark, heart pounding, because memory doesn't always respect healing. But here's what I've learned. Telling your story doesn't erase the pain. It doesn't undo what was done. But it does take the weight off your shoulders and place it where it belongs, on the truth. And the truth, no matter how long it hides, never dies. I now volunteer full-time at the library in Jonesboro. I've helped start a small writers group for young women called Her Voice Matters. Every month, they come in with journals full of poetry, short stories, letters they'll never send. I don't edit their words. I just listen, because sometimes that's the most powerful thing we can do. Listen and believe. Emily is in college now. She still writes, still calls me when she's stuck on a metaphor or needs advice about her lesson plans. She says she wants to teach English one day. I used to flinch at that thought, but not anymore, because now I know that a classroom doesn't have to be a place of fear. It can be a place of transformation. And as for me, I'm 74 years old. I live in the same house with the rose bushes out front. I drink tea on the porch. I read stories to kids on Wednesdays. I've lived through silence, shame, and sorrow, but I've also lived long enough to see what healing looks like. It isn't loud. It isn't perfect. It's a slow bloom, and I'm still blooming. To anyone listening, especially those of you my age, I want to tell you something from the deepest place in my heart. It's never too late to tell the truth, not just to others, but to yourself. You may think your story doesn't matter, that it happened too long ago, or that no one will care. But I promise you, there is someone out there who needs your voice, who needs your courage to find their own. And if the people you trusted once turned away, I'm sorry, truly. But that does not mean your pain wasn't real, or that your story doesn't deserve daylight. You are not too old. You are not too late. You are not too broken. You are still here. And that means your truth still matters. If this story touched you, if it reminded you of something you've carried, or if it made you think of someone you love, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your words might be the spark that helps someone else find the strength to speak. And if you believe in the power of truth, healing, and second chances, subscribe to our channel for more real stories from people like you, like me, like us. Because even after all these years, we are still learning how to be free together. Thank you for listening.